Hello and welcome to the CivilTalk podcast. I'm your host, Tapasio Althouse. If you're new to the show, this is where we explore civility and social emotional learning with esteemed guests, expert insights, and practical advice to help people navigate the world. Today on our show, we are joined by Robin Hills, a distinguished expert in emotional intelligence and personal development with over 40 years of experience spanning from startups to global corporations. As the Director of Ei4Change, he has dedicated his career to enhancing business performance through the lens of emotional intelligence, positive psychology, and neuroscience. Ei4Change stands at the forefront of emotional intelligence education, offering accredited programs like the Advanced Emotional Intelligence Program and Master Practitioner in Emotional Intelligence, both recognized by the Institute of Leadership. With over 500,000 learners in 200 plus countries, Robin's courses and content have made emotional intelligence accessible, practical, and transformational on a global scale. One of Robin's significant achievements was creating the first online course on stress management a decade ago. At a time when online learning was just emerging, this course represented a major milestone. He's the author of The Authority Guide to Emotional Resilience in Business and a sought-after speaker who's taken the stage at conferences worldwide. Today, we'll dive into what it means to practice emotional intelligence and leadership, and how we can all use self-awareness and empathy to build more civil, emotionally intelligent communities. Welcome to the show, Robin.
Tapasio, it is a pleasure to be on your show. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So I want to dive into Ei4Change. So you've trained over 500,000 learners across more than 200 plus countries. What originally inspired you to create Ei4Change, and can you tell us a little more about the business?
Yeah, sure. I have been working in the field of people development for, as you mentioned, over 40 years, and I was working within the corporate environment, mainly in the fields of the commercial arena, sales, marketing, leadership and management of people working in research. And all of these involved training and developing people and getting them to work at their best and really trying to optimize their performance. And through a series of redundancies, I found myself in a situation about 15, 16, 17 years ago of really deciding where I go with my career, because the opportunities were very, very slim where I live. Mm-hmm. And it was during the time of the financial crash of 2007, 2008. Mm-hmm. So there weren't many opportunities for me. So I decided what I wanted to do was to focus my career and focus my skill set around developing people. Mm-hmm. And at the time, emotional intelligence was known about by a few, and a lot of people were very interested in it. And I realized that this was something that I could dedicate my life and my career to, because it's fundamental to what we all practice. It's just a case of being more aware of it and being more focused around it. So Ei4Change came out of the work that I did, Emotional Intelligence for Change, and I work at the personal level, the team level, and the organizational level to effect change and to bring about change.
Right. So you go into these businesses and, see the issues, see the problems, talk to people, offer courses. How have your offerings sort of evolved over the years to meet the changing needs of leaders and businesses? Because I'm sure, the needs 40 years ago were really different from what they are now. I mean, maybe they're the same. Who knows?
I think they are the same. It's just that we respond to them in a different way. And one of the things that I do not talk about when I go in and talk with organizations is emotional intelligence, because a lot of people really don't necessarily understand what the two words mean when they're put together. And a lot of people are still of the mindset that emotional intelligence is all about emotions and people being emotional and that getting in the way of their performance. So they will talk about, oh, well, we don't do emotions here. We're a rational organization. We like to think things through and be logical about the sort of things that we do. We're a technical organization. Well, so is every organization, but what every organization needs are skills around leadership, communication, team working, collaboration, self-awareness, building up empathy, influencing and persuading people, selling. These are the sort of things that organizations are interested in. So these are the sort of things that I will be talking to them about in terms of the skill sets that they need. And then when they're ready, I will introduce this idea of emotional intelligence and how it underpins everything that we do, and how it then becomes transformational in terms of working with people and getting the best out of people.
Yeah. What is the sort of willingness to change with these leaders and businesses? Because we're talking about enhancing communication. We're talking about enhancing empathy. You know, when you bring these concepts to leaders and businesses and organizations that seem to not have this sort of vernacular or vocabulary, what is the overall willingness to change? And is there a sort of self-awareness from these leaders that there's a sort of internal issues, right? Because it really comes back to the I, and, you know, hopefully people can have some sort of self-awareness to know that they're doing something incorrect or wrong. And that takes a lot of gumption, I think, for people to admit that. How do you find leaders and people in businesses sort of, you know, dealing with these concepts and change?
A lot of them are very, very open-minded and are very keen on bringing about change. We still have some very old school leaders out there, and quite a few of your guests have talked about these. They're the ones that seem to think, well, I'm very successful. I know how to do things. Do it the way I do it, and you'll be successful with me. So they don't necessarily have the level of self-awareness that's needed to be emotionally intelligent. And I think in terms of training leaders with regards to emotional intelligence, there's a really interesting paradox that I can bring to the podcast around organizations, emotional training. When I'm working with leaders, they say, oh, we know about this emotional intelligence. We've been practicing it for years. We're all emotionally intelligent around here, which means that really they're not, and they have a lot of need for emotional intelligence training. So what I do is I take a very basic emotional intelligence training course and I badge it. Emotional intelligence for seniors, or an advanced emotional intelligence training course, and I'll run that. Now, lower down in the organization, the junior managers and the people at the coalface of the organization tend to have a better level of self-awareness and tend to be a lot more emotionally intelligent. So for them, they need to have a course which is badged and titled An Introduction to Emotional Intelligence. But like I say, paradoxically, they get a more advanced course than what their senior leaders get, because they don't necessarily need all the basics. They've got it. What they need is to build upon the basics and become more self-aware, more empathetic, better at their communication skills. And they need to learn to manage upwards.
Right. So when you're teaching, you know, your clients, what are some of the most, you know, common emotional intelligent blind spots you see repeatedly?
Well, I think a lot of it is around self-awareness. Having talked to you about people being self-aware, I think there's great levels of improvement that can be had around making people more self-aware. What I'm interested in when I'm working with people is not what their weaknesses are, not what limits them. Because when I'm having a conversation with anybody, be it a coaching conversation or being a training conversation, people are very eager to tell me what they're not good at. But they find it very difficult to actually tell me what it is that they are good at, what their strengths are. And I think a lot of modesty prevents them from doing that. So I have a range of different training interventions and exercises that will help people recognize what their strengths are. Some of the most powerful are obviously psychometrics or behavioral and personality assessments that can really give some very objective empirical data around what their strengths and weaknesses are based around their personality and their behavior. But a lot of people can get a level of self-awareness just by sitting down and talking to people about how they work at work, how they behave, what people value in them, what people see in them, and what their strengths are from their perspective. So those are the types of things that I will encourage people to consider when they're looking at training in emotional intelligence.
Can you just walk us through that process for you when you're going into a company and teaching and doing these, other than, personality tests? What does coaching for you look like on a 1-to-1 basis or a 1-to-20 basis? What are some exercises that you do, and what are some exercises that our listeners can maybe work on independently and take from this podcast?
Sure. I think one of the most powerful exercises that I run when I'm running a training course around self-awareness is I actually ask people to get their mobile phone out. Now, most trainers, when they're working with people, ask them to put their mobile phone away. They're a great distraction. And they do tend to lower people's emotional intelligence, particularly around emotional regulation, but that's another story. So what I ask them to do is to get their mobile phone out, and I get them to text people, their friends, their families, their work colleagues, and I ask them to text 3 people. And I give them an idea as to what to say. I'm in a training course looking at leadership and emotional intelligence. Can you give me some ideas around what it is that you really value in me? And that's the gist of the text. And I say to them, well, you can write whatever you want, obviously, make it authentic. But basically, what I'm wanting from people is an idea as to what they value in you. So get the text coming through and let's see what you get. Now, I do that. I set the exercise up before a break, and over the break, the texts come in, and people are coming up to me and saying, oh, I sent this to my mother, and this is what my mother says, or I've sent it to my boss. This is what my boss has said, or I've sent it to the most senior leader in the organization, and this is what I've got back. And quite a few people become quite emotional in a very positive way, in a very affirmative way, because they're hearing things that they've never heard before, or they have heard, but they've not necessarily listened. So what I then get them to do is to actually own this data, own this information. And I get them to write it down on a flip chart, the 3, the 4, the 6 texts that have come through, because people don't, once they get the bug, they don't stop at 3. And usually they get 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 texts coming through for the rest of the day. So what I do is I get them to summarize what they've learned about what their strengths are. And I get them to stand up in front of the group and look the group in the eye and say, I am good at. This is me. These are my strengths. And quite a few of them find it very hard. And I have to get quite positively assertive with them to say, I'm not interested in the but.
Right.
And quite a few people will want to add in a but.
Right.
Yes, this is what I'm good at, but, and I have to stop them and say, no, we're not interested in anything that comes after the but. What we're interested in are the things beforehand.
Mm-hmm.
And that really helps people to have a great understanding as to what their strengths are. And it really is quite affirmative for them and quite positive. And I can see people grow and develop just through that simple exercise.
Yeah.
Now, depending upon the length of the program and depending upon the clients that I'm working with, that will then be supported with a personality or a behavioral assessment.
Yeah.
Some of these will require one-to-one coaching and some of them will require team coaching. But those assessments will obviously actually reinforce and confirm everything that they've had through their text messages, which is really quite interesting.
Yeah. That's interesting. You mentioned earlier, which caught my ear, you know, people might hear these compliments about them, but they don't really listen. And it's interesting that when you create a space for this dialogue to exist, it sort of sets in stone a lot more than it does when you're in casual conversation. You know, you tend to overlook, maybe you'll think about a compliment that so-and-so gives you, but then you sort of reorient the conversation somewhere else. But when you really dedicate a space to have these sort of compliments and positive reinforcement to exist, it sort of sets in stone in your mind a lot harder than it does otherwise. And I think that's a really interesting concept and something that's that you're doing, that I think is an interesting component of making sure these sort of positive values sort of are able to be digested by the person a lot easier and in a more prolonged way. And it's sort of like this positive reinforcement allows it to continue and to exist because you're thinking about it more, you know?
Yeah, but it's definitely, I think it really is quite revolutionary for some people. And I've had a couple of senior managers on my courses who've been in tears.
Right.
Nobody has ever been so nice to me before. It's not me being nice to them. They're just getting some affirmative messages.
Right.
And more often at work, it's more of a negative climate. And people will be pointing out weaknesses, mistakes, errors, and they will continue to do that because that is then part of their culture. So for somebody to actually come away from that and to actually have some positive affirmations, they then can go back into that environment knowing, okay, yeah, I do screw up. I do make mistakes. Yeah, I'm not very good at this. I'm not very good at that. That's fine.
Right.
This is what I'm really good at. So let's work with more opportunities for me to do the things that I enjoy, that energize me, that I'm good at. And let's find people within the team who are capable of doing the things that I'm not so good at, because that might energize them.
Yeah, it's great to think about your company or, you know, your job as a community. You know, I think that you think of communities as, you know, your home or maybe your neighborhood, but you don't really think of the place you work as a community. And I like the idea, what you're talking about right now is making me think of like you're transitioning businesses into communities where each person is good at something. And when you feel like you're part of the community, you really feel, I know this sounds a little trite, but you feel like you can shine a little better. You feel like you can bring out the positive characteristics of yourself more. And then you also feel less insecure about the things that you can't do because you know that your community can support you.
I think that's a really interesting and good way of looking at it. And it's an emotionally intelligent way of looking at it because it brings in collaboration and it brings in teamwork and it brings in empathy and it brings in the social awareness and the social responsibility around working within an organization. Now, I work with charities, I work with government organisations, the public sector, and I work with corporates. So it's basically the whole spectrum of organisations. What is an organisation? Let's think about it. Because when I ask that question, I get some really interesting answers. It's not a logo, it's not a brand, it's not a set of buildings, it's not a price on the stock market, it's not a group getting together. It's a network of people. An organization is a network of people that are working together, as you say, Tapasia, as a community to bring about change. And it doesn't matter whether it's a service or whether it's a product. If the ethics and the values are correct, what you're doing through your service or your product is you're actually improving the lives of everybody. Now, with that focus, you move away from this idea of I need to sell my product to make a big profit, which is fundamentally what a lot of businesses and organizations are about. But you can do that, and you can do it in a much more sustainable, ethical way, and you can probably do it better because you've had a change of perspective.
Right. Yeah, it's the more humanistic perspective, not sort of guided by what you want, but what you can give. And I think that's way more powerful. So you were a pioneer in creating one of the first online courses on stress management. Can you talk to us about this and why you saw the need to create it?
Sure. I was working in my very early nascent Ei4Change business, and I had a number of organizations that asked me to do some training for them, and I prepared all the material for them, and then within a few weeks the training just dissipated in a puff of smoke. And that happened more often than it should have done. And I realized I was sitting on a library of very good quality material that I just wanted to do something positive with. So I recognized that there was a need for emotional intelligence training online. I joined a platform, Udemy, which is still going and still going very, very strong, and a number of other platforms with a view to providing them with online training around emotional intelligence. So I worked hard on it to create a range of videos and a range of practical activities and some quizzes and workbooks that could be integrated and built up into an online course. And it took months. And I put the course up onto Udemy and basically forgot about it. I got very busy with some face-to-face training courses, but I found that it started to generate a degree of interest. And through that, I thought, what I ought to be doing is doing more of this and make it a little bit more sustainable. So I worked on another course, then another course, and then another course, and now I've got about 50 courses based on a number of different platforms, and they are all doing very, very well. But I think really to go underneath your question, Tapasia, one of the things that I recognized very early on is you can't learn emotional intelligence through a series of video courses any more than you can learn emotional intelligence by reading a book. What you've got to do is you've got to go out there and practice emotional intelligence. You can learn about emotional intelligence through these media, but you have to have the wherewithal, the desire, the need, the motivation to go out there and affect change in yourself, to become more emotionally intelligent. So really through the online training, it was encouraging people to go out, get some feedback, try some things out, get it wrong, make mistakes, learn through that, learn about themselves, and work out ways in which they can do things better, work out ways in which they can have a much more positive impact. And that really drives the online training rather than just a series of technical videos.
Yeah. So do you have sort of follow-up training sessions? Because that's something I kind of want to segue into, is sort of that intersection between emotional intelligence and the age of artificial intelligence, and how you see the two intersecting and how they coalesce together and how they, have a lot of friction. Because like you say, learning something online is one thing, but doing it in a tactical way away from your screen is the best way to do it. How do you reinforce that education and the neuroscience of change with online teaching?
Well, what I've got to do is to recognize that I cannot go out there with 500,000 odd people and work with them on a one-to-one basis. What I've got to do is to provide them with the wherewithal and the encouragement and the material and the information and the details that they need to go out and affect and build up the change themselves. And I have had some remarkable follow-ups with people by email, by video conferencing, even on a face-to-face basis where people have recognized me and come up and said, I've taken one of your courses and it has really changed the way I work. And they give me some really, really good examples. Now, we've got to be realistic here. 500,000 people taking the course. If I have had a 1% transformation in that number, I feel that I'm doing very well. So really here, we're talking about 5,000 people.
Right.
So 5,000 out of 500,000 is 1%. If I've affected more than 1% of the people taking my courses, then I feel I've made a real positive change to a good number of people. I'm hoping, and I've got no evidence to support this, but I'm hoping that it's a lot more than 1%.
I'm sure it is. Who can, we're trying to evaluate those metrics at CivilTalk, and it's just, it's a difficult metric to sort of gauge, but I hear you.
I would say don't worry about it. Go out there and do the best that you possibly can, and teach and train and encourage people to be the best versions of themselves. If they take it up and if they run with it, you've done a great job.
Right.
You won't change everybody. Some people will like it, some people won't. We've got to bear in mind that some people are not ready for self-awareness. They don't necessarily like what they find out about themselves.
Yeah.
And because of that, they would then rather apportion the blame onto me, onto you, onto anybody else, rather than taking the blame themselves and saying, hey, I've got to change here. That's a bit too mature for them. It's a bit too emotionally intelligent.
Oh, don't we have people we would love to swallow that pill?
Well, a lot of people will ask me how I'm affecting emotional intelligence and change at the political level.
Right.
And I say, I do not go there because that is not my area of expertise. My area of expertise is within business, and that's where I'm focused.
Yeah. So for, we're running out of time here, but as for our last question, what advice would you give to someone who wants to build a values-driven business in the coaching, education space?
Well, I'm going to go back to the previous question that you asked me about with regards to artificial intelligence, because artificial intelligence is a great tool, but we've got to learn it, to use it properly, more responsibly and more ethically. Now, what artificial intelligence cannot and never will be able to do is be entrepreneurial. And what I mean by that is that artificial intelligence will never have the ability to be innovative, to be creative, to look at an opportunity within the marketplace and think, let's adapt, change, substitute, whatever it is, what I'm doing to make a difference here. So artificial intelligence cannot innovate, it cannot be creative, it cannot make the right judgments, it doesn't take risks, it doesn't go to places where the risk might be a little bit higher and just give it a go and adapt around things. It hasn't got the adaptability to work around things. No. It also doesn't have any meaning or any purpose. So what is our purpose in life? Why are we here? What are we doing on this planet, this tiny little planet in a humongous universe? What is it that me, Robin Hills, can do that is different? That is part of being entrepreneurial. And the other thing about entrepreneurial is about being empathetic, being understanding, and working with relationships and working with people through that network we were talking about. Because, again, working with people, working with networks, working as teams, motivating people to be the best that they can be, again, is something that artificial intelligence will never be able to do.
Right. Or reinforce as much as the human touch. Yeah. Well, Robin, thank you so much for being on the show today. We really appreciate your insight and your expertise.
It's been wonderful. We've had a great conversation, Tapasia. Thank you.
We did. I appreciate you. And for our listeners, if you'd like to learn more about Robin's work, head to Ei4Change.com, where you'll find a treasure trove of emotional intelligence courses, tools, and insights. And if you've enjoyed this conversation, please don't forget to follow and share with someone you know who you think could benefit from these conversations. You can also find all of our podcasts on our website at www.civiltalk.com. And as always, thank you for joining us on the CivilTalk podcast. Until next time, keep learning, stay curious, and lead with purpose.